And we'll talk about the God theory now, after we've examined a couple of aspects to it, heading back into a conversation about consequences next on Coast to Coast AM. This is Ian Punnett. Dr. Bernard Haisch, author of the God theory, an astrophysicist's understanding of how there could be a divine, an invisible hand, a divine intelligence at work in the universe. If you're right, how does it change science? What are the consequences of the God theory to other scientists out there who are stuck in a kind of scientific atheism?
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about that. Just let me make one final comment about the digital universe, and that is that it's not just all pie in the sky. We're actually available online as a beginning under digitaluniverse.net. Just want to make clear it's not just a future thing. Back to your question, I think there's going to be a tremendous need in the future for science to understand what consciousness is all about. Now, for the last almost 300 years, I guess, the exemplar of true science has been physics. It's been so precise. It's been considered so fundamental, and you can do experiments, and the theory is well developed. So the exemplar of science, what science at its best should be, is usually thought of as being physics. Well, that's changing. If you even do something like get on Craigslist these days and look for jobs in science, you'll find that most of the jobs, 99% of them, maybe not 99, but 90 or 95% of the jobs, are in biology, in biotech. So it seems to me that we're moving from a phase in which we have historically thought of physics as the exemplar of science to biology as the exemplar of science, because that's where the action is. And biology is a whole lot more messy than physics is. You can't do the kinds of simple experiments on human beings or animals or plants that you can with atomic particles. And so we're going to be confronted with a different kind of view of what science ought to be. And I think that view also will have to take into account consciousness. And I think we're going to discover that consciousness is not something that comes out of the brain chemistry, but rather something that's more fundamental, and it's kind of the other way around that we should be beginning to look at that. So and this all ties in with the God theory, because I think that the God theory is saying that consciousness is the basis of physical reality. It's the basis of our own nature, and it's the basis of the intelligence that thought the universe into existence.
So, how would that? What would change at the academic level? If you could use your influence to get the God theory instituted into, academia, into the way in which science is taught, how would it change the way scientists relate to, say, physics or astrophysics or the universe?
I think we will have to discover some way to tap into our own inner knowledge, because if you look at these mystical and transcendent experiences throughout the ages, you find that there are realities that are encountered that simply don't jibe with the world as we know it. That something else is there, something that's beyond our way to describe in the words that we have in this everyday reality that we live in. And to begin to explore that arena, and I'm not sure how you would do that. I suppose, it's been said you could do it with drugs, but I don't think that's a good approach. To begin to explore that arena, I think, will be the challenge for the science of the rest of this century. It's sort of a combination of the biology of human existence, well, biology in general, and the nature of consciousness, but consciousness viewed as something that's fundamental, not merely as some second-hand epiphenomenon.
I'm trying to. I kind of tracked with you there when you were talking about ways to try to understand it or to explicate the experience, and then you ruled out drugs, which I think is a good idea, at least in my view. And I'm not quite sure, though. I think a lot of people have found that through a limited use of drugs, they would argue, they were able to see things and expand their mind, and they didn't have to go back to drugs. Once their mind was opened up, they could then at that point imagine it without having to use the chemicals.
Well, I agree with you. I think I was too harsh there, because I do think that certain drugs open up some aspects of consciousness that are probably very valuable to be studied. And I think that our paranoia about the misuse of drugs is probably preventing us from studying things that really could be explored using them. I was being a little bit cautious there. But I think there is a difference, and this is something that I've written about in a new book that I'm now shopping around through my agent. It's an experience that was reported by a doctor who lived in Berkeley in the 1960s, and he had one of these transcendent experiences where all of a sudden he saw light becoming brighter and brighter and brighter, sort of light all around him that had no apparent source, and he felt himself getting happier and more ecstatic and more ecstatic. It was a classical transcendent experience where he reached a timeless state and bliss, and it was something that just really, really was the most important thing he'd ever experienced. Well, he wrote that down, he described it as well as he could, and then he decided to experiment. And so he took LSD, and he compared the two experiments side by side. And that's unique because people have had one experience or the other, but it's rare that people have had both experiences, both the real transcendent experience and the drug experience. What he found was they weren't really the same. They were similar, but the LSD experience was much more brittle, he said. He called it brittle, and that his mood could change, from moment to moment, whereas with the ecstatic experience, it was something that didn't change. It grew steadily, but it didn't oscillate between being something that was pleasant and something that was terrifying, whereas the LSD experience could shift in the moment. And it didn't last as long. I mean, not the experience itself, but the memory of it. The transcendent experience was something that he could never put out of his mind. The LSD experience was something that, he could remember, but it wasn't that important. And so that was an important comparison between two things that seemingly, can have a similar kind of insight, but one was definitely much more profound than the other.
What's the most transcendent experience you've ever had?
I'm sorry to say none. I'm this kind of intellectual guy that thinks about these things, thinks about them deeply, I hope. But I don't have the experiences. My wife does. And, I sort of, I get some secondhand views of that from her, though even in her case, it's not been one of these, one of these life-changing transcendent experiences, but still she's much more experiential than I am. And I'm just one of these intellectual guys that thinks about things, but I just don't feel it.
How proactive have you been about trying to feel it?
Well, I've tried to meditate, but I haven't been that successful at it. I've never had any experience that I can't explain.
Could I challenge you and say that perhaps you haven't put yourself in enough circumstances where you would be likely to have an unexplainable experience? Possibly, yes. Maybe I should go on a month-long retreat, or go to an ashram in India. Yeah, or even a sweat lodge. No, I'm really serious. I mean, I think that any of these, I think you almost owe it to the God theory, and even to this book that you're shopping around about transcendent experiences, to try to find it, to try to find what theologians would refer to as the thin places, where one is more likely to be able to cross over into a divine understanding or to experience some glimmer of the God spark. And that if you put yourself in these places, who knows what might happen? That in a way, perhaps the great intellectualism that you enjoy is a kind of force field around you, and that you really have to go further to either tone that down or to get out of it altogether. Well, I think you're correct, and I appreciate the suggestion. I think sometimes perhaps that my life's work or my life's goal should be to try to bring out these views intellectually, to express them in a way that will appeal to the intellectual side of the readership. But you're probably right. Well, for your own personal experience, if nothing else, and I'm taking nothing away from your evangelism to the intelligentsia. I'm just saying that I think you might really enjoy not actually just watching baseball, but putting on a glove. And you may suck at second base, but at least you really know what it's like to have a fastball coming at you. Good point. Yeah. So as and this goes back to where we first started when I was asking you about how scientists react to your work. That they're, in a way, you could almost be sort of a prophet for them, for other people that might be inclined, but are also too afraid to think outside of their scientific box, or afraid of what it might do to their credibility at the university or whatever. And to have somebody else out there who's already sort of pioneered that, I think that would be of enormous benefit. Yeah, you're probably correct. So what if you had to say there was what's the opposite of the God theory? If there's a if there is a duality to this, what